I'm glad you're back. It's another one of those nights. Rain against the glass, the world outside quiet for a while. You've come to the right place. I have a story for you that I hope will do what we do best here. Scare you, just a little, while making you feel perfectly at ease. If you enjoy these nights with me, it would mean the world if you'd subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next meeting. As you listen, if you enjoy the story, a simple like lets me know. Afterwards, I'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment telling me what you thought. All right, get comfortable. Are you ready for what I have to share? I'm a traveling salesman. I've stayed in 100 cheap motels, and they all have one thing in common: a Gideon Bible in the nightstand drawer. I'd never opened one in my life until one night at the Starlight Motel on Highway 50. I should have left it closed, because some Bibles aren't about salvation. They're a record of the damned. The Starlight Motel was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. A single-story L-shaped building with a flickering neon sign that had more dead letters than lit ones. I checked in late on a Tuesday night. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, bleach, and a deep, underlying note of quiet desperation. The carpet was stained, the lampshade was crooked, and the ugly seascape painting on the wall was bolted down. It was just another anonymous, lonely room on another endless business trip. I couldn't sleep. The air conditioning unit was making a god-awful rattling sound, and the thin walls let in every noise from the highway. The TV reception was just a blizzard of static. Bored and restless, I did something I'd never done before. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out the Gideon Bible. It was a standard issue, the cover dark and slightly worn. I idly flipped through the thin, almost transparent pages, not really reading, just looking for a distraction. And then I found something. In the book of Psalms, a single verse had been underlined in shaky blue ink, and next to it, crammed into the narrow margin, was a handwritten note. The handwriting was small, feminine, and looked panicked. "He's watching me from the parking lot. He's been there for an hour. I know it's him. Room 12, 6/14/98. A strange voyeuristic chill went down my spine. It was a little message in a bottle, a ghost from a past guest. A woman, scared and alone in this very room over 20 years ago. I felt a strange connection to her, a shared moment of loneliness. I kept flipping through the pages, my curiosity now fully awake. I found another entry, this time in the book of Job, a book of suffering. The handwriting was different, a man's angry, jagged scrawl. The crying won't stop. It's coming from the room next door, but I know it's empty. I know she's not real. Room 12, 3/22/04. I stopped. My heart began to beat a little faster. I looked at the number on my key, then at the number on the door. I was in room 12. This wasn't just a Gideon Bible. It was a guest book, a secret, terrified confession log for the horrors of this specific, forgotten room. I couldn't put the book down. It felt like I was holding a cursed object. I spent the next hour hunting for every handwritten entry, a morbid detective piecing together a story I knew I didn't want to understand. I found dozens of them, a chorus of fear and paranoia spanning decades. They were written in different hands, in different colored inks, all of them dated, all of them from room 12. In Leviticus, the man in the painting is looking at me. I swear his eyes are moving. 9109. In Isaiah, there's something scratching inside the walls. It wants to get out. 11:5:11. In Matthew, the phone rang. No one was there, just a sound like the ocean. We are 1,000 miles from the ocean. 2:18:15. In Revelations, the face in the mirror isn't mine. It keeps smiling at me. It wants to trade places. 7:7:19. Each entry was a little snapshot of a private hell, a different fear, a different haunting for every lonely soul who had passed through this room. I realized the room itself was a focal point, a weak spot in the fabric of reality, and this Bible was the only place the victims could leave their testimony, a desperate, hopeless warning to the next guest. I started to notice a pattern. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate over the years. The early ones were just notes about feeling watched. The later ones were about sounds, movements, and direct, terrifying interactions. The thing in this room, whatever it was getting stronger, more confident. And then I found the most recent entry. It was just 1 month ago. The handwriting was a panicked, barely legible scrawl, the pen digging so deep it had almost ripped through the thin, delicate page. It was crammed into the final, blank pages at the back of the book. It's not the room, it's the book. The book shows you things. It invites them. Once you read, you're on the list. I saw the girl from 98 in the mirror. I heard the scratching in the walls. I heard the ocean on the phone. And now it's showing me something new. A new face. A man. The next guest. The book is showing me the next guest. His name is David. Don't let it. The entry was cut off mid-word, the pen having ripped a long, violent tear through the rest of the page. My name is David. I threw the Bible across the room as if it had burned my hands. It hit the far wall with a soft thud and fell to the stained carpet. I was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. It knew my name. I was the next chapter in this horrifying secret history. My only thought was to leave, to get out, now. I started throwing my clothes into my suitcase, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it. I had to get out of room 12. I had to get out of the Starlight Motel. And then the haunting began for me. As I was packing, I glanced up at the ugly, cheap seascape painting on the wall. It depicted a generic bearded fisherman at the helm of a small boat, and I swear, as I looked at it, the fisherman's painted eyes slowly, deliberately moved to look at me. I stumbled back, my heart seizing in my chest. Then I heard it, a faint, dry, scratching sound coming from inside the wall right behind the headboard of the bed. Scratch, scrape, scratch. I ignored it, grabbing my suitcase and heading for the door. As I passed the nightstand, the old beige rotary phone that sat on it suddenly jangled to life with a loud, shrill ring that made me scream. I stared at it, frozen. It rang again. My training as a salesman, my instinct to always answer a call, took over. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. The line was dead, but it wasn't silent. Through the receiver, I could hear a faint, distant sound, the sound of ocean waves crashing rhythmically on a shore, and the faint, sorrowful cry of a seagull. I was living out the script. The Bible wasn't just a record of past horrors. It was a preview of coming attractions, and it was my turn. I slammed the phone down and ran for the door. I just needed to get to the bathroom to splash some water on my face before I drove. I burst into the small, grimy bathroom, turned on the cold water, and leaned over the sink. I looked up into the mirror, and my own reflection was gone. In its place was the terrified face of a young woman with dark, wavy hair, her eyes wide with the panic I now understood completely. The girl from '98. She looked at me from the other side of the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. And standing just behind her in the reflection, a tall, dark, indistinct shape. My reflection snapped back into place a second later, but the image was burned into my mind. I looked closer at my own reflection, at the dingy bathroom wall behind me, and I could see it, faint but there, the dark, tall shape of a man standing right behind me in the mirror, a man who was not in the room with me. I knew I couldn't just run. The last desperate entry in the Bible made it clear. It's not the room, it's the book. Leaving it here would just be passing the curse on to the next poor soul who was unlucky enough to be given the key to room 12. I had to take it. I had to destroy it or contain it somehow. I ran back into the main room, grabbed the Bible from the floor, and sprinted for the door. The moment my hand touched the book, the paranormal activity in the room exploded. The lights flickered violently. The scratching from the walls became a loud, frantic clawing. The painting of the fisherman fell from the wall with a crash. The room was trying to keep me and its book from leaving. I threw open the door and ran out into the cool desert night, clutching the Bible to my chest like it was both a poison and an antidote. I didn't bother checking out. I threw my suitcase and the Bible onto the passenger seat of my car, started the engine, and peeled out of the motel parking lot, leaving the flickering, malevolent light of room 12 behind me. I drove for hours, the Bible sitting on the seat next to me like a venomous snake. I could feel a strange, cold energy radiating from it, a palpable aura of misery. The windows of the car kept fogging up, despite the dry desert air. I knew I had to get rid of it. But how do you destroy a thing like that? Burning it felt wrong, like it would just release whatever was inside. I finally saw a sign for a 24-hour construction site, a new highway being built. It was my best bet. I pulled off the road and found a section of the site that was just piles of loose dirt and gravel. I dug a deep hole, and without letting my skin touch it again, I used my tire iron to push the Bible into the hole. I buried it, packing the earth down with my feet until there was no sign it had ever been there. I felt an immense, profound sense of relief. It was over. I was free. I quit my job the next week, and I couldn't do the traveling anymore. I never stayed in a motel or a hotel again. I tried to move on, to build a normal life. It's been 10 years. I'm married now, with a 7-year-old son. I thought the nightmare was a distant memory, a story I could barely convince myself was real. Last week we were on our first real family vacation, staying in a clean, respectable brand-name hotel in California. I was helping my wife unpack. She opened the nightstand drawer to put her own book inside. "Oh, look," she said casually. "I didn't know they still put these in hotel rooms." She pulled out a Bible, but it wasn't a new blue Gideon Bible. It was an old, worn black leather book with no markings. My heart stopped. I felt a familiar, sick dread that I hadn't felt in a decade. "Where did that come from?" I asked, my voice a strangled whisper. "It was just in the drawer," she said, handing it to me. "It looks really old." My hands were trembling. The book felt cold, heavy. I opened it to a random page. The page was filled with the familiar, shaky handwriting of terrified strangers. The last entry was a man's scrawl. "I don't know how it found me. I buried it years ago, but it's back. It showed me my wife's face in the mirror. It's showing me my son's. It's not just about a room anymore. It's attached to me, to my family." I flipped to the last page of the book. There was a new, final entry. The handwriting was my own, though I have no memory of writing it. It's dated for tonight, and it says, "It wants my son." My boyfriend Mark and I needed a cheap place to stay for the night on our cross-country trip. We found the Sunset Courtyard Motel. It was clean, quiet, and all the rooms faced a central pool. We didn't know we weren't just checking in to a room for the night. We were checking in to a memory that was stuck on repeat. Mark and I were on day 4 of a cross-country drive, somewhere in the vast, empty middle of the country. Our car started making a noise we couldn't ignore, and we limped into the next small town just as the sun was setting. The only place to stay was the Sunset Courtyard Motel. It was one of those classic U-shaped motels from the 1960s, perfectly preserved. The doors to all the rooms faced a clean, sparkling blue swimming pool in the central courtyard. It was eerily clean, eerily quiet, but we were too tired to care. The other guests were what I noticed first. They were all strange. A family was unloading suitcases from a vintage wood-paneled station wagon, all of them dressed in clothes straight out of the 60s. A woman in a 70s-style floral dress stood by the pool, smoking a cigarette and staring at the diving board. A man in a bright blue 80s tracksuit was jogging in place near the ice machine. It felt less like a motel and more like a movie set for a period drama. We checked in, the man behind the counter giving us a polite but completely vacant smile. We got to our room, room 7. It was clean but sterile. As we were unpacking, I looked out the large window that faced the courtyard. It was exactly 7 p.m. The sun was a perfect, fiery orange ball on the horizon. And then it happened. The woman in the floral dress by the pool dropped her cigarette, walked to the end of the diving board with a strange, deliberate grace, and performed a perfect, beautiful dive into the deep end of the pool. She sliced into the water without a splash, and she never came back up. I stared at the water, waiting, my heart starting to pound. "Mark, did you see that? That woman, she just dove in and she's not coming up." Mark came to the window. We both stared at the perfectly still blue water. No bubbles, no thrashing, nothing. "She probably just swam to the ladder and got out while you blinked," he said, ever the rational one. "Relax, Chloe. We're both exhausted." I tried to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just watched someone vanish. Later that night, just before I closed the curtains, I looked out the window one more time. The courtyard was empty, the pool a sheet of black glass under the moonlight. But standing in the exact same spot by the diving board, completely dry, was the woman in the floral dress, lighting up another cigarette. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept telling myself I was overtired, seeing things. The next morning, I felt a little better. We found out our car needed a part that wouldn't arrive until the next day. We were stuck. I spent the morning watching the other guests from our window, a feeling of deep, creeping dread growing in my stomach. They were all in loops. The family from the 60s would unload the same brown suitcase from their station wagon, carry it to their room, and then 5 minutes later they would be back at the car unloading the exact same suitcase again. The man in the tracksuit was still there, jogging in place, his feet never moving from that same spot of concrete. Their movements were smooth, seamless, and endlessly repetitive. They were like NPCs in a video game, stuck on their programmed paths. I tried to point it out to Mark. "Look at them," I whispered. "They're not real. They're doing the same things over and over." He got angry. "Chloe, stop it. They're just weirdos. This is a weird small town. You're freaking yourself out. Just leave them alone." He refused to see it, and his denial made me feel like I was the one going crazy. We were stuck there another day, trapped in that quiet, sun-drenched purgatory. At 6:55 p.m., I grabbed Mark's arm. "Just watch," I said, my voice shaking. "Watch the woman by the pool, please." He let out an annoyed sigh, but he stood at the window with me. We watched. At exactly 7 p.m., as the sun touched the horizon, the woman dropped her cigarette. She walked to the end of the diving board. She performed the exact same perfect, graceful dive, and she vanished beneath the water without a trace. Mark was silent. I could feel him trembling next to me. "Okay," he whispered, his voice full of horror he could no longer deny. "I saw it. We weren't just staying at a motel. We were watching a replay of a memory, and we were the only live audience." Just as we were processing this, a new car, a modern Honda, pulled into the parking lot. A man in a business suit got out, looking tired. He walked into the front office to check in, A new guest, a new variable, a tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. We weren't the only real people here anymore. We watched the new guest from our window like he was a lifeline. He seemed normal. He brought his briefcase into his room, made a call on his cell phone. He was real, like us. We decided to wait until the next morning to talk to him, to see if he was seeing the same impossible things we were. The next morning, I woke up early and immediately went to the window. I looked for the new guest, and I saw him. He was standing by his brand new Honda in the parking lot. He was washing it. He'd spray a section with a hose, wipe it down with a cloth in a perfect circular motion, and then spray the same section again. I watched him for 20 minutes. He never moved to a new section of the car. He was just washing the driver's side door over and over and over again. His face had the same placid, vacant smile as all the others. My hope turned to pure, soul-crushing terror. The motel hadn't gained a new guest. It had gained a new memory. It had recorded him, and now he was part of the collection, doomed to wash his car in the morning sun for eternity. We finally understood the true nature of the trap. We weren't just watching a loop. We were in danger of becoming a loop. If we stayed too long, the motel would find a single defining action for each of us. Me staring out the window, Mark pacing the room, and it would record us, trap us, and add us to its silent, repeating play. We had to get out. We tried to leave on foot. We walked out of the courtyard and onto the long, empty highway that led back to town. We walked for what felt like an hour, the hot sun beating down on us. But every time I looked back, the cheerful U-shaped motel was the exact same distance away, shimmering in the heat. The road was part of the trap, an endless treadmill to nowhere. There was only one way out. We had to break the routine. We had to do something that didn't belong, an action of pure, unscripted chaos. We waited until sunset, the motel's witching hour. All the silent, looping figures were in their places, a quiet audience for the main event. The woman in the floral dress was walking her slow, deliberate path to the diving board. It was now or never. Mark looked at me, his face grim. He asked, "Ready?" I nodded. He ran out into the center of the courtyard, and with a loud, desperate roar, he kicked over a heavy metal trash can, sending a cascade of garbage clattering across the perfect concrete. The effect was instantaneous. Every single looped figure, the family, the jogger, the car washer, stopped. The woman on the diving board froze mid-stride, and every single head, in perfect, silent, mechanical unison, turned to look at Mark. The figures, now free from their loops, began to move towards Mark. They didn't run, they just walked. A slow, deliberate, converging tide of silent, blank-faced people. Their placid smiles were gone, replaced by empty, doll-like expressions. They were the motel's antibodies, and Mark was the infection they had to cleanse. "Mark, the car!" I screamed. I ran out of our room, grabbed his hand, and we sprinted for our broken-down car at the edge of the parking lot. I jumped into the driver's seat, my hands fumbling with the keys, praying for a miracle. I turned the key. The engine, which had been completely dead for 2 days, roared to life on the first try. The system was breaking down. I slammed the car into reverse. The figures were on the driveway now, a silent, human barricade. I didn't have a choice. I floored the accelerator. As we sped toward them, their forms began to flicker and distort like a corrupted video file. We drove right through them, but there was no impact. It was like driving through smoke, through static. We hit the highway, and I didn't take my foot off the gas. I looked in the rearview mirror. The Sunset Courtyard Motel, its clean lines and cheerful sign shimmered violently in the twilight. It flickered once, twice, like a bad TV signal, and then it and the stretch of road it was on simply vanished, leaving only the empty, darkening desert behind. We found ourselves back on the main interstate, at the exact exit where our car had first broken down, as if the last 2 days had been nothing but a shared, vivid hallucination. The car was running perfectly. It's been years. We never talk about what happened. How could we? We tried to find the Sunset Courtyard Motel on a map, online, anywhere. It doesn't exist. It never did. It was a pocket of time, a wrinkle in reality that we had the misfortune of stumbling into. I thought we had escaped. I thought we were free. But sometimes I still see the glitches. I'll be walking down a busy city street and I'll see a man get stuck in a brief, repetitive loop. He'll tie his shoe, stand up, then immediately bend down and tie it again. I'll see a woman take the same sip of coffee over and over for a full minute. I tell myself it's just my trauma, my mind seeing patterns that aren't there. But last night, I was looking through old home videos from before our trip. It was a video of me and Mark at a family barbecue, happy and carefree. I was about to turn it off, but as I watched, the video glitched. The image froze for a split second, and there, in the background of our sunny, happy memory, standing by my parents' backyard pool, was the woman in the 70s floral dress, smoking a cigarette, watching us. The motel hadn't just trapped the people who stayed there. It had been scouting. It had been watching us and people like us all along, just waiting for us to break down on its stretch of road.
At the Roadrunner Inn, the rooms aren't numbered. They're named after birds. Sparrow, finch, blue jay. My sales route put me there once a month. The manager gave me one rule: don't take the end room, the one named Raven. I thought it was a superstition. It wasn't. The Raven Room is different. It doesn't just house a guest for the night. It consumes them. I'm a regional sales rep for a pharmaceutical company. My territory is the vast, empty expanse of West Texas, a lot of driving and a lot of lonely nights in cheap motels. My regular stop on the first Tuesday of every month was the Roadrunner Inn, a place so remote it felt like the last outpost of civilization. It was a single-story building, clean but old, run by a quiet, watchful man named Elias. The motel had a strange quirk. Instead of numbers, the rooms were named after birds. Elias always put me in Finch or Sparrow, the rooms near the front office. One night I arrived late, and the only room left was at the far end of the property.
The key he handed me had a small carved black bird on the tag. The room was named Raven. Elias hesitated before giving me the key. He looked me in the eye, his expression grim. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "The walls are thin in that room. You might hear things. Just ignore them. And whatever you do, don't try to move the furniture, especially the bed." I just nodded, too tired to question his weird rules. The Raven room felt wrong. The air was heavy and smelled faintly of rust and something else, a coppery, almost meaty smell. The room was sparsely furnished, a bed, a nightstand, and a heavy, dark wooden wardrobe against the far wall. The really unsettling thing was that the walls were completely, obsessively covered in a dark, floral-patterned wallpaper. It was peeling in some places, but it covered every single surface, even the ceiling. It felt like being inside a small, claustrophobic box. I couldn't sleep. The silence in this room was different from the others. It was a hungry silence. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A soft, wet, rhythmic sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was coming from inside the wall that the bed was pushed up against. It sounded impossibly like a giant, slow heartbeat. I remembered Elias's warning. Ignore it. I tried. I buried my head under the thin pillow, but the sound was a physical vibration I could feel in my bones. Then came a new sound, a soft, wet, tearing sound, followed by a low, gurgling sigh, also from inside the wall. I sat bolt upright in bed, my blood running cold. It sounded like something large and wet was feeding just a few inches from my head. I spent the rest of the night in a chair in the corner of the room, my eyes glued to the wall, not daring to sleep. The sounds finally stopped as the sun came up. I checked out as soon as Elias opened the office, a shaking, sleep-deprived wreck. He just gave me a knowing, pitying look. "You should have waited until morning," was all he said. I tried to get a different motel for my next trip, but there was nothing else for 100 miles. I was forced to stay at the Roadrunner Inn again. When I checked in, I pleaded with Elias, any room but the Raven. He nodded grimly and gave me the key to Finch. But I couldn't let it go. I had to know what was in that room. I waited until Elias was busy with another guest, and I slipped down to the end of the building. The door to the Raven room was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was different. I could have sworn the bed had been on the right wall. Now it was on the left. The coppery smell was stronger. And the wallpaper. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under a section that was peeling near the floor, I could see a layer of different wallpaper underneath, and another layer under that. Dozens of layers, a thick, papery skin that had built up over years. I went back to the office and, feigning an historical interest in the motel, I asked Elias if he had any old guest ledgers. He led me to a dusty back room filled with old leather-bound books. I started with the most recent and worked my way back, looking for any guest who had been assigned the Raven room. I found them, a string of single male travelers just like me, and next to each name, a horrifying pattern emerged. The check-in date was recorded, but the check-out date was always blank. I found the entry for the last guest who had stayed in that room, a man named Robert from a few months ago. His name was there, but next to it was a small, frantic note scrawled in Elias's own handwriting. Tried to move the wardrobe, called me at 3 a.m., said the wall was soft, line went dead. My blood turned to ice. I looked around the dusty storage room. In the corner was a small pile of unclaimed personal effects, each tagged with a room name. A wallet, a pair of glasses, a worn leather belt, all tagged Raven. These were the things left behind by the men who checked out without checking out. They were the things that had been in their pockets when they vanished. I knew then that I had stumbled into a horrifying local secret. The Raven Room wasn't just haunted, it was a predator. And Elias wasn't just a motel manager, he was a zookeeper, a caretaker for the thing he kept at the end of his property. I had to know what was behind the furniture. I had to break the one rule I was given. I waited until well after midnight, until the last of the highway noise had faded into silence. I slipped out of my own room and went back to the Raven Room, the door still inexplicably unlocked, as if it were waiting. The room was cold, the air thick and heavy. The bed was on the right wall again. The room was rearranging itself. I ignored it. My focus was on the one piece of furniture that hadn't moved. The heavy, dark wooden wardrobe standing against the back wall. It was the only wall I hadn't heard sounds from. I put my shoulder against it and pushed. It didn't budge. It was impossibly heavy, as if it were bolted to the floor. I pushed again, my feet slipping on the worn carpet. With a loud groaning screech, it moved just an inch. The coppery, meaty smell that filled the air was so overpowering I almost gagged. I pushed again and again until I had moved it about a foot away from the wall. I shone my flashlight into the gap. The wallpaper behind the wardrobe was different. It was a dark, reddish brown, and it was soft, damp. It bulged slightly, like a blister, and it was pulsing, a slow, rhythmic, almost imperceptible in and out motion, in time with the slow thump, thump of the heartbeat I could now hear, loud and clear. This was the heart of the room. As I stared, hypnotized, a thin vertical seam appeared in the center of the bulging wallpaper. It wasn't a tear, it was a slit, an opening. It slowly, wetly peeled open like a mouth, revealing a dark, viscous, reddish-black cavity within the wall. A low, contented, gurgling sigh echoed from the darkness inside. It knew I had found it. It knew dinner was served. I didn't run. I was frozen, my flashlight beam fixed on that wet, breathing mouth in the wall. From the dark opening, a long, pale, boneless tendril, the color of raw meat, slowly emerged. It slid down the wall and began to creep across the floor towards me, leaving a trail of dark, sticky slime in its wake. The spell of my paralysis broke. I turned and sprinted for the door. But the door which had been opened just moments before was now shut. The lock clicked, a final, definitive sound. The room had sealed me in. I'd backed away into a corner, a strangled scream caught in my throat. The tendril from the wall was joined by another and another. They were not fast. They were slow, deliberate, confident. The heartbeat in the walls was getting faster now, a hungry, excited rhythm. Just as the first tendril was about to touch the tip of my shoe, the door to the room burst open. It was Elias, his face a mask of terror and grim resignation. He was holding a large red can, an ex-Versoni Din Malate extinguisher. "Get behind me!" he yelled, and he pointed the nozzle at the mouth in the wall and squeezed the handle. A massive cloud of white, freezing CO2 gas erupted from the extinguisher, filling the room. He blasted the wall, the tendrils, everything. The things recoiled with a high-pitched, sizzling shriek, retreating back into the wall. The mouth slammed shut. "It hates the cold," Elias said, his voice a choked whisper, as he grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the room. "It puts it to sleep for a little while." He told me everything. He had inherited the motel and the thing in it from his father. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember. A creature, a growth, something that had somehow fused with the very structure of the room. It was mostly dormant, he said. It only woke up and redecorated a few times a year, and when it did, it got hungry. "I tried to keep people out," he said, his voice full of a weary, ancient guilt. "I give them the warnings, but sometimes it gets what it wants." He told me the layers of wallpaper were like the rings of a tree, a new layer applied after every feeding to cover the stains. I was supposed to be the next stain. I quit my job. I never drove through West Texas again. But the story isn't over. A few months ago, I was looking at a real estate website, a morbid curiosity. I looked up the Roadrunner Inn. It was for sale. Elias was finally retiring. I read the property description. A charming vintage motel with a loyal customer base. 11 rentable rooms plus one additional room at the end of the property, currently used for storage, but with excellent potential for renovation and expansion. The current owner notes that due to the unique organic insulation in that final room, it holds the heat exceptionally well.